detail-oriented, focusing on everything from A to Z in terms of the business, sort of intimately familiar with it, and prepared to get his hands dirty from I will get in there and actually look at solving the problem myself. So is that, that suggests to me, although this can't be the case because you couldn't run this many companies if you were doing it this way, there may be some challenges in learning when to delegate, when to hand off tasks, because in order to get that level of resolution, to be able to see things with that much finitude, you also need to spend a lot of time on it. And then if you're solving the problems, how do you choose the problems that are yours to solve and the problems that aren't, so on and so forth. So that must be a challenge, delineating between what is my problem to solve and what is somebody else's.
Yeah, so I would say most leaders, like most CEOs we work with, have exactly that problem for exactly the reasons you described. I think the Elon method is a little bit different, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but the way I think about it is he actually delegates almost everything. Like he's not involved in most of the things that his companies are doing. He's involved in the thing that is the biggest problem right now until that thing is fixed. And then he doesn't have to be involved in it anymore. And then he can go focus on the next thing that's the biggest problem for that company right now. So like for example, in manufacturing, there's this concept of the bottleneck, right? And so in any manufacturing chain, there's always some bottleneck. There's always something that is keeping the manufacturing line from running the way that it's supposed to. And sometimes the bottleneck is at the beginning of the process. It's like we can't get enough raw material. Sometimes the bottleneck is at the end of the process. We don't have enough warehouses for the finished product, or the bottleneck might be somewhere in the middle. And if you run a manufacturing company, there's always a bottleneck. Whatever the bottleneck is holding everything up, and the job number one is to remove that bottleneck and get everything flowing again. And I think he basically has universalized that concept, and he basically looks at every company like it's some sort of conceptual assembly line, sometimes a literal assembly line, making cars and rockets, and basically any given week there's a bottleneck. There's guaranteed to be the main bottleneck. There's going to be one thing that's going to be the thing that's holding people back. And so the answer to your question, the resolution of the paradox, is I'm going to micromanage the solution of that. I don't need to manage everything else, because everything else by definition is running better than that, right? And so I can go focus on that. The other part of it that is so compelling, and this is where I think a lot of especially non-technical CEOs would really struggle to implement the method, is he really, when he identifies the bottleneck, he goes and he talks to the line engineers who understand the technical nature of the bottleneck. And if that's people on a manufacturing line, he's talking to people directly on the line, or if that's people in a software development group, he's talking to the people actually writing the code. Right. So he's not asking the VP of engineering to ask the director of engineering to ask the manager to ask the individual contributor to write a report for, that's to be reviewed in 3 weeks. He doesn't do that. He would throw them all out of the window. But there's just no way he would do that. What he does is he goes and personally finds the engineer who actually has the knowledge about the thing. And then he sits in the room with that engineer and fixes the problem with them. Right. And again, this is why he inspires such incredible loyalty from the especially the technical people who he works with, which is they're just like, wow, if I'm up against a problem I don't know how to solve, freaking Elon Musk is going to show up.
I can call on the guy that owns the company.
Freaking Elon Musk is going to show up in his Gulfstream, and he's going to sit with me overnight in front of the keyboard or in front of the manufacturing line, and he's going to help me figure this out.
Wow.
Right. And so it's like, how do you possibly... and this is the thing. It's like, okay, you're like a normal CEO running a normal company. Like, how can you possibly compete with that?
What are the other reasons that CEOs of similar companies or comparable companies don't do that? Technical understanding, I get that you need to be able to get your hands dirty from a specificity perspective, but what else?
Yeah, so that's a lot. That is a lot of it, and that's a topic that makes people really mad, because non-technical people really hate being told that they are not qualified to do something because they're not technical. But every now and then, the technical details actually do matter. So there's a whole domain there, and most managers, it's like most people in government are lawyers. Most people in business and in senior levels are MBAs. Most large companies are not run by engineers, right? They're run by trained business people, and so increasingly also lawyers. And so there is a real challenge there. And then I just think more generally, it's just the way that management is taught, and most classically in the form of something like a Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School. It's basically management as it was sort of developed and implemented, I would say, in like the 1950s, 60s, 70s. It was sort of the so-called scientific school of management. And so it's basically management as a generic skill that you can apply to any industry. And you could manage a soup company, or you can manage whatever kind of company, and they're kind of all the same, and it kind of doesn't matter what they do. And there's a common set set of management practices, and it has, is a lot to do. It's, process. It's, how do you structure, how do you manage the balance sheet? How do you set the review schedule for the meetings? How do you do compliance? How do you, hire, how do you manage how do you hire and motivate executives? How do you resolve interpersonal conflicts? Like all these like general business skills. And by the way, those general business skills are, very useful in lots of contexts. It's just that training doesn't give you any of the that training gives you none of what you need to go do what Elon does. And then Elon I would say he pushes it as far as he can, and not doing all the stuff that you're classically trained to do, so that he can spend all of his time doing the things that only he can do, which it turns out has this incredible, catalytic multiplicative effect where his companies are, so just incredible.